the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. We are starting the program a bit late. We're asking for your indulgence as we await the arrival of some more participants before we start the program. So please do bear with us. Thank you. I am Francola John of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, and we now would like to start the official program. I would like to invite Mr. Sean Codrington, who is the hotel's safety officer, to do a safety briefing for you.
Good morning. First thing, a little housekeeping. Bathrooms. When you go through door here, bathrooms are to the left, straight on the corridor, or in the lobby area. Gents are next to the stairwell, and the ladies are to the right in small clove. Okay. Now, in the event of an emergency, the alarm will ring. Someone will meet you here, and you will go through the door. You'll be guided to our assembly point, which is to the east of the building. Our assembly point is opposite shift back just after the bus stop. Okay, where your facilitator will do a head count, and only then, if everything is given all clear, would you be able to come back onto property? And that's it. Okay. Have a good morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Codrington. My role here is very short this morning. I just have a few housekeeping rules in terms of our online participants. To interact with our speakers today, kindly use the chat for questions during the moderated question and answer sessions. For our remote speakers, to reduce disruptions during the workshop, you will be allowed to start your video and unmute shortly before your speaking slot. We ask that all comments in the chat be on topic of the workshop. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Vashti Maharaj, advisor at the Commonwealth Secretariat, to now welcome you to the official part of the program. Vashti.
Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the workshop on effective legal frameworks for building the digital economy. And I trust that everyone has had a good cup of coffee this morning. We're looking alive and excited for the day ahead. It is a sincere pleasure, my sincere pleasure, to welcome to the podium this morning the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, who will be providing welcoming remarks to participants this morning. Rodney.
Good morning. I want to welcome all of you, and in particular, the Honorable Dale Marshall, the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs for the Government of Barbados. The Honorable Grenville Williams, also the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. Chris Southworth, Secretary General, International Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Paulo Patuque, Senior Director, Trade, Oceans and Natural Resources, Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda. Other senior government officials, members of the CTU, the Commonwealth Secretariat, our distinguished participants from the International Telecommunications Union, distinguished speakers, sponsors, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this three-day workshop on effective legal frameworks for building the digital economy. It represents a collaboration between the Commonwealth Secretariat, many months of hard work with Vashti Maharaj, who's with the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the CTU team to really set the context for how do we build a digital economy? What are the what is the legal framework? What pieces of legislation, what regulatory framework do we need to drive digital economies? And there's been a great focus on digital economies, quite rightfully, because of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Many governments are establishing ministries with responsibility for technology and digital transformation here in Barbados. I was pleased to work with the new Ministry of Digital Transformation. Well, it's called Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology. Initially, I believe it's now called Ministry of Industry, Innovation and Smart Technology. In Trinidad and Tobago, there's the Ministry of Digital Transformation. All of these with an understanding that to move forward in today's new technologically driven environment, that it is important to set the legal frameworks to drive and promote and encourage digital transformation across all sectors. There's so many technologies that are impacting us today across the board. Very recently, of course, things like artificial intelligence. And in fact, you may be familiar with one called ChatGPT, which it is a new artificial intelligence-based search engine. Well, it's an artificial intelligence tool, but it is made available to the public. And in fact, I asked it to write my opening remarks for me, and I did quite a good job. But I just asked it to do it just to see what it would actually produce. But it is quite good, and I encourage you to go and see what the capabilities are for artificial intelligence. And the bottom line is that it is predicted that AI will replace many, many jobs that we believe now are not capable of being provided by computer systems will in fact be provided within the next 5 to 10 years. So even mine perhaps would probably be replaced by AI. So who knows? Anyway, we are pleased to have this collaboration. We have interactive sessions planned for over the next few days. What we want to not have is a talk shop. We want that there are positive outcomes, actionable items that we can take and implement within our own national context. So with that in mind, and without further ado, I want to welcome you and encourage your active participation over the next few days, the sharing of your own experience from your national environments. I actually was supposed to have the number of countries, but I don't have it. I will provide it for you at some point. But we have very wide regional representation here today. Our colleagues from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, Cayman Islands. And our online participants, how could I forget? We have quite a few participants online joining from around the world. So we want to welcome all of you, and we appreciate that you took the time to be here with us. And we look forward to, Minister Ishmael, Davison Ishmael, Minister of Innovation, Industry, Science and Technology. The name has changed since I left, but I'm really pleased you could join us here today. And with that, I want to hand over back to Vashti. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. At this time, I'd like to invite the Senior Director of the Trade, Oceans and Natural Resources Directorate of the Commonwealth Secretariat, my Senior Director, Mr. Paolo Katuki, will be delivering opening remarks virtually, and I will hand over to our AV team to allow Paolo to deliver his remarks. If you can give me a few minutes so that we can get him to join us. He is online.
Can you hear me?
Good morning, Paulo. Thank you so much for
Morning.
joining us. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
We do not seem to be hearing you. I think we just need to have the team.
Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me?
All right. We should be able
Okay.
to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, Mr. Rodney Taylor, Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, Barbados, Mr. Dale Dermot Marshall, Honorable Ministers who are joining the call and the conference, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this workshop on effective legal framework for building the digital economy. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation to you all for taking time off your busy schedule to join us today and for the upcoming 2 days. The Commonwealth Secretariat is aware of the growing importance of creating strong and resilient digital economies within the Caribbean and correlative need to create an adequate enabling environment through the creation of effective and cohesive legal frameworks. In this regard, we have, through the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda, collaborated with the Caribbean Telecommunications Union to build capacity among key policymakers, government officials, senior ICT officials and technocrats, as well as legal reform officers and regional stakeholders involved in the information communications and technology and the digital economy spheres. The Caribbean community, the CARICOM, is the oldest surviving integration movement in the developing world, comprising 20 countries and home to approximately 16 million citizens, 60% of whom are under the age of 30. As a region renowned for its vibrancy and resilience, the Caribbean has certainly risen to the challenge in the wake of the global pandemic and recent international trade disruptions by placing digital transformation at the forefront. Such regional commitment has been evidenced by the unanimous agreement of the CARICOM Ministers of ICT in February 2021 to accelerate the region's digital transformation. In the recent report, which was launched by the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda, titled Quantitative Analysis of the Move to Paperless Trade, it was identified that digital trade facilitation across borders could increase trade across the Commonwealth by around $90 billion, and legal reform to support the digitalization of electronic records could unleash as much as $1.1 trillion, bringing the total benefit from paperless trade to nearly $1.2 trillion by 2026. The report also specifically identified that stakeholders within the Caribbean saw the COVID-19 pandemic as a primary catalyst for change and pointed to initiatives aimed at promoting the use of technology to ease border controls, as well as the political will to reap the full advantage of more streamlined trade. The digitalization of trade can also increase access to finance, significantly reduce costs and processing times, reduce the risk of fraud and corruption, and also create global standards for interoperability and technical standards. In order to unleash the multiplicity of benefits of paperless trade, it is absolutely essential to engage in appropriate legal reform as this provides the requisite foundations for creating an enabling environment for a thriving digital ecosystem. Mindful of this, we at the Secretariat are here to provide the necessary support and assistance in the region's legal effort. We are pleased to be partnering with Caribbean Telecommunications Union in the hosting of the workshop, and are also very fortunate and appreciative to have several trusted partner organizations on board, such as the International Chamber of Commerce, United Nations Capital Development Fund, CARICOM Competition Commission, International Telecommunications Union, CARICOM Impex, UNCITROL, British Standards, who will identify best practice standards as well as elucidate upon their experience with other regions. The agenda for the workshop covers a broad range of topic areas, focusing on key legislative building blocks in national frameworks that support the digital economy, as well as international perspectives on building the digital economy. And in this regard, I would encourage you to become immersed in the wealth of information to be imparted with inclusive approach to its inculcation towards building resilient digital economies within the Caribbean. On this note, I would like to wish you a productive and fruitful workshop ahead, and to anticipate that this very positive way will positively pave the way for further collaboration with the Caribbean Telecommunications Union in promoting the development of a resilient digital economies. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paolo. And at this time, it is my distinct pleasure to invite to the podium Honorable Dale Marshall, the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs of the Government of Barbados.
Well, we're off to a fine start. Good morning, everyone. When the practice of saying protocol having been observed first came up, I was dead set against it. I felt that each speaker should pay tribute to all of the important guests there. It has become so commonplace, and this list of guests is so long that I fear that I will have to resort to saying protocol having been observed. Good morning. I do feel, though, that I must acknowledge my new colleague, Attorney General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Granville Williams. It's funny how life goes. There was a time not long ago when Mr. Williams would have called me sir and saluted. And now the tables have certainly turned, but let me welcome you to this very important and august office. Let me also pay tribute to my ministerial and cabinet colleague, Mr. Davidson Ishmael, who probably should be here giving this speech instead of me. It is my pleasure to provide a few remarks today at the opening of this workshop, focusing on effective legal frameworks for building the digital economy, and hosted jointly by the CTU and the Commonwealth Secretariat. The organizers have been very kind to give me 15 minutes to do this address, but you'll be pleased to know that I have decided to give them back 5. It is my understanding that this particular conference has been long in the making and represents a long-standing tradition of cooperation between these two institutions. And this one is the first of 2 such workshops that will take place in 2023. This one in particular has a timely focus on digital economies and the critical pieces of legislation that must of necessity underpin our efforts to nurture and support national and regional digital transformation strategies. It represents an intersection between law and technology and it seeks to foster a greater understanding of how modern legislation in key areas such as telecoms, financial services, cybersecurity, and cybercrime, and several others help to create an enabling environment for digital trade. If you would allow me a personal reminiscence, in the late 1990s, I was invited to be, and I accepted the post of chair of an international committee of the very ambitious but now dead free trade area of the Americas. It was the Committee of Experts on Electronic Commerce, a very sophisticated name. And it was in those days, the early days of e-commerce, a term that nobody uses anymore. And we were struggling with the basics, to regulate or not to regulate, to tax or not to tax, how best to protect intellectual property, how to contract, whose laws applied. In those days, Amazon had not yet seen a penny in profit. There were no smartphones on the market. And my then cutting edge Toshiba Tecra laptop weighed in at near 12 pounds. I am forced, therefore, to view what we had and did then as one would view a donkey cart alongside one of today's fancy SUVs. As I said, no one speaks today of electronic commerce. We've forgotten those dark days, and we now talk about the digital economy. Since those early days, our countries have enacted various pieces of legislation aimed at information and communications technology, or as you specialists will call it, ICTs. For Barbados, these include our Telecommunications Act, Electronic Transactions Act, and our Computer Misuse Act. More recently, we have enacted legislation on data protection, and we've made amendments to the above pieces of legislation in order to bring them more in line with the realities of an ever-evolving technological landscape. The pace of technological innovation will always outstrip our ability to make and enact legislation to either fulfill our policy mandates or to address societal challenges that technology will bring to the forefront. Areas such as cybersecurity and cybercrime, artificial intelligence, fintech, and others can rarely be seen as highly technical, requiring specialized knowledge of the terminology and the potential impact on our respective national economies and on our societies. But having said that, legislation that will stand the test of time has always to be technologically neutral and should not be overly prescriptive. It should, as we all know, provide a framework for managing and resolving conflicts, protecting rights and freedoms of individuals, promote the general welfare of society, and achieve public policy objectives. Legislation helps to ensure that everyone is subject to the same rules in a transparent way and provides a mechanism for changing those rules as our societies evolve. Of course, I am assured that we are not here to turn legal professionals into cyber experts. My time for that is past. Nor are we here to turn cyber experts into lawyers. But we are here to foster greater collaboration and to provide a space where we can work collaboratively through some of our challenges within CARICOM on growing our economies, fostering cross-border trade, and leveraging modern digital tools. I am told that Barbados is currently the chair of the regulatory cluster of the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. This has been designed to expand intra-Commonwealth investment and has significantly contributed to leading discourse and knowledge exchange across the Commonwealth on the importance of building effective legal frameworks. This perhaps is the foundation for promoting trade and investment, and it is a happy coincidence, therefore, as chair, that this workshop is being held in Barbados. We also committed to creating greater resilience within the Caribbean in light of the global trade disruptions occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, the challenges with the international supply issues that arose therefrom, and also to prioritize digital transformation as approved by COTED. I say this in the context where Barbados has lead responsibility within the CARICOM quasi-cabinet for the single market and economy as well. A strong CSME is also a part and parcel of what you'll be discussing over the next few days based on the agenda before you. And of course, this discussion extends beyond one of technology. This also includes traditional issues and challenges with doing business with our brothers and sisters within this region that we call home. At a national effort, the government of Barbados has made a concerted effort to prioritize digital transformation with the creation of my friend's ministry, the Ministry of Innovation, Industry, Science and Technology, and supported by significant investments in the creation of digital platforms for public service delivery. The pandemic led to the acceleration of these initiatives and allowed us to redouble our efforts on digitizing several processes relating to the grant of business licenses, for example, and the facilitation of electronic payments for various services. But I concede that the very catalyst that COVID-19 was for accelerating our digital transformation was obviously also a major hindrance to what ought to have been a smooth rolling out. Minister Ishmael could tell you that half of the problem was that the staff was not at work, they were working from home, and when they were at work, they were sitting 12 feet apart. Many of these services required close collaboration with the Office of the Attorney General in order to give legal effect to and to provide regulations to govern the new and more efficient business processes. Two of the things that Minister Ishmael and I are proudest of, and I'll give you what they are in the area of policing and the area of general administration. In policing, we had a challenge where an individual who applied for a police certificate of character had to wait 12 weeks to get an appointment. They would go in, get fingerprinted, and then wait another 5 or 6 weeks to have the certificate of character issued to them. We determined that this was an archaic way of doing things. And with significant effort and a lot of elbow grease, we now have a situation where in Barbados you can apply for a police certificate of character online, pay online, and you can get that certificate within 7 or 8 minutes. It is delivered to you online. And as for liquor licenses, thank you very much. It's always Rodney was part of that. And with liquor licenses, for example, under the not so long ago, if you applied for a liquor license, you had to make your application, hand it in at the magistrate's court, pay your fee, and then be summoned to court only on Mondays, and wait until your particular applications was called, appear shivering before a magistrate and a committee of total committee of 3 to be told whether you were going to get your liquor license or not. All of that is out the window. You apply online, pay online, and you get your liquor license within a matter of an hour or 2. Of course, there's a lot more to be done, and Minister Ishmael, young and vibrant, is just the person to do it. Mr. Chair, I think I might take back my 5 minutes. Let me fast forward though. We recognize that this is a constantly changing environment. And in many respects, there's a great risk that Caribbean governments can lag behind. We've lagged behind in many, many areas over the years. There are some who were saying not long ago that we were lagging behind in the area of Fintech. And then, of course, we had the Sam Bankman-Fried debacle in our sister country, the Bahamas. It would probably be inopportune for me to say that as I was preparing this speech last night and I wrote Sam Bankman-Fried, I thought, with a name like that, you're almost doomed to disaster. Sam Bankman-Fried. And of course, by the time I added Bernie Madoff to the equation, I had to start writing because it was laughing at my own efforts. But we mustn't allow what happened to FTX to cause us to recoil and cower and run from emerging systems. If you look at our history, you will know that we had the Great Depression, which had pretty much every bank in the world on the verge of collapse. And in more recent times, we had the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, and then we had Enron, and then we had Bear Stearns. These things happen from time to time, but we must always view them through a lens of optimism and determine that we will be there whenever the dust clears. I'm pleased to see the level of interest by both traditional and new players on our local market, offering innovative solutions that enable the movement of money by way of our mobile phones. Barbados will ensure that there is the requisite regulatory environment through its institutions, such as the FSC, Financial Services Commission, the Central Bank, and the Fair Trading Commission in particular, to nurture this fast-growing financial services area. I'm coming close to the end. In my view, we cannot look to develop the digital economy across the region in any serious way without considering the issue of how we deal with the negative impacts, the negative aspects. And in that regard, I'm referring to cybercrime. Barbados has enlisted its Law Reform Commission, chaired by Sir David Simmons, to produce for us a cybercrime statute which will replace our 2005 Computer Misuse Act. And as I was reflecting with Rodney earlier, that the name of our 2005 statute speaks wonders. It is called the Computer Misuse Act. That was its focus, how people misused the technology. But it didn't get into the specifics. It didn't get into the nitty-gritty. It was a very general statute prevalent at the time. But as time moved on, we recognized how poor it was as a statute to govern criminal behavior. Our new statute, when passed, will provide specifically for the combating of cybercrime in all of its iterations, from illegal access to computer systems, to computer-related fraud, to child pornography and child grooming and cyberbullying. And all of these things we try and contort ourselves to see if we can fit it into something now called computer misuse. And we haven't been very successful. That particular draft statute is now in the hands of my ministerial colleague, and I expect that we will have it in Parliament within the next 2 months. And as a senior minister, I know he's taking that as a directive more than as a hint. Let me close by welcoming all of you to Barbados. And I invite you along the way to spend a little bit of time enjoying those things that we have to offer. But as you do that, please keep in mind what you are here for. I applaud your focus on international best practices, as evidenced by the many international and regional experts who will be presenting on our agenda. I hope to have the opportunity to sneak back in and sit in the back and sit and understand the technological side of what I do. We must, of course, focus on what works best for each country based on our needs and based on our capacity. And we also have to look at how within CARICOM we can harmonize our approach to these issues. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your invitation. I hope that my few words will last you a little bit longer than your morning break.
Thank you very much, Honorable Attorney General, for your warm and gracious welcome by our host country and your keen words about the evolution from e-commerce to the digital economy, loaded with many words of wisdom on what we should focus on. Go on to know.
Thank you very much, Vashti. So again, we beg for your indulgence as we ask the following persons to please come to the front to have some photos. We'd like to invite the honorable ministers along with the Attorney General from the St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We'd like to have you in the ministerial shot as well. So Honorable Dale Marshall, Honorable Minister Ishmael, Honorable Minister Williams, Secretary General. Yes. We'll take it, but we'll put the background, or we'll put the banner right here.
Okay.
All right.
And then it's exciting.
Yes, correct. All right. Yes. All right, ministers. We need to put it on the side. Yes. Not in front of the. The light from the projector, the light from the projector on the top of their heads. But we need the brand.
They get this.
All right, thank you, everyone. I would now hand you over to Vashti Maharaj, who would continue with the program as we get back on track. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your beautiful smiles, and we assure you that we will also be sharing the group photograph with everyone. At this time, we're going to go into the main program and the main order of business for today. We're going to start off this morning's presentations with a presentation by the United Nations Capital Development Fund. We are pleased to have joined us this morning Ms. Helen Gradstein and Mark Wensley, who are going to jointly present a presentation on measuring digital economies and creating an enabling environment for financial innovation. I'd like to kindly ask that you give them your due attention and of course, save your questions and answers for the end of their presentation. I'll hand over to our AV team, Helen and Mark.
Thank you so much. Is everybody able to hear me this morning? I'm assuming hopefully everyone's able to hear me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. Well, thank you to all. We're very happy to be here today, and I'm hoping my colleague Mark is also available on the line to present the PowerPoint as well. So today we will be able to focus on a presentation to hopefully set the stage, in essence, how to develop and create an enabling digital finance ecosystem. And what we have here today is to present two separate presentations. The first around the Inclusive Digital Economy Scorecard, which is a measurement tool designed by the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and then the second around an enabling regulatory environment to enable digital financial innovation. On the next slide, I would like to just provide a brief introduction of the United Nations Capital Development Fund. So the United Nations Capital Development Fund is a United Nations agency. Sorry, Mark, next slide, please. Yes, so the United Nations Capital Development Fund. So we are, for those who don't know us, we recently opened up our Eastern Caribbean offices last February of 2022, and we're very happy to be here. My name is Helen Gradstein, and I am the regional lead and head of the UNCDF Eastern Caribbean office, which is based here in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. Apologies that we weren't able to join everybody today in Barbados. And the UNCDF, what does our program in the Caribbean do? We try to make ourselves agile, available, and technical. And currently our flagship program, which is funded by the European Union and provides support to enable digital finance policy initiatives, as well as provide investment in the private sector, works across Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the Eastern Caribbean states. And in general, our UNCDF office provides a mixture of different programs, particularly regional policy acceleration programs, which provide mixes of technical assistance and boot camps, workshops, and training, as well as financing to scale innovation and new fintechs with promise for financial inclusion, as well as a window for discrete technical assistance. And I'm just going to hand it over to my colleague Mark for himself to introduce himself and to kick us off with the United Nations Capital Development Fund Inclusive Digital Economy Scorecard, again, which helps to set the stage for today's conference and hopefully provide some meaningful dialogue on what are the pieces for a digital economy and how it could be measured. Thank you very much. Mark, over to you.
Good morning. My name is Mark Wensley. I am a digital advisor with the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today to share how the Inclusive Digital Economy Scorecard measures the development and inclusiveness of the digital economy, as well as to share a few examples of how data-driven tools like IDIS are being adopted into decision-making processes to operationalize and advance key policy changes. You will hear me refer to the term IDIS. So I first want to take some time to define it. IDIS stands for the Inclusive Digital Economy Scorecard. IDIS has been designed with and for policymakers to help them understand the status of their digital journeys and to set the right priorities for the years ahead. IDIS is a metrics-driven tool which presents comprehensive high-level data, and IDIS is now in its third edition. Data was collected in 26 countries last year, and we are now preparing for the launch of the fourth update this year. I should also mention that IDIS is implemented in the countries where we have on-the-ground experts and experience. So together with our government partners, UNCDF collects and validates the data. I will share a few examples later on of how partners are adopting this tool. But first, I just want to highlight UNCDF's unique role in helping to score market barriers and to engage policymakers on the strategic findings from the scorecard. For more than a decade, UNCDF has supported central banks to leverage the power of digitalization, to transform the financial systems and to make them more inclusive with basic technologies. In the last 5 years, our support has expanded to ministries and bodies with strategic responsibility for digital economy transformation, such as ministries of ICT and digital economy, science and technology, and national planning authorities, to mention a few. As an active facilitator of market systems development, UNCDF is able to build on our relationships with the private sector to engage them and to really identify barriers that are limiting the growth and inclusion of their services, which equips us to help provide expert judgment in several key areas. And we will be hearing more from Helen later on in the session about how UNCDF is working with governments today in many different areas to do this. Coming back to IDIS, you've heard me mention the financial sector, but as we know, there are many other sectors that are undergoing digitalization. Digital transformation shapes a wide range of sectors, extending to agriculture, education, health, transportation, etc. And this involves numerous government agencies and a broad set of actors in the private sector and civil society. So to chart a path to successful digital transformation, it's crucial to coordinate the efforts of many stakeholders. And fundamentally, this effort must strengthen a core set of digital building blocks, namely policy and regulation, infrastructure, innovation, and skills. These are part of many digital economy frameworks. What IDIS does is to build on this holistic framework with a metrics-based approach to start measuring and tracking the development of the digital economy, really recognizing that all of these digital building blocks must be strengthened, and that one without the other prevents access to and use of digital technologies to digitize sectors and economic activity. So, for example, on policy and regulation, this holistic framework expands the aperture for assessment from active policy promotion for interoperable infrastructure to how policy is introducing and pushing digitalized social transfers and G2P alongside test and learn regulatory approaches to promote innovation. On infrastructure, for example, it opens up the aperture for assessment from digital connectivity and device ownership to open digital payment systems and digital identity systems. With this approach, we're connecting policy and regulation to how services enter into the transactions and the participation of people and small businesses in the economy. For some policymakers, this holistic framework serves as a quick inventory of enabling and inclusive policies to compare against and to prompt strategic reflection and discussions. As this happens, we recognize that making digital transformation inclusive really requires an intentional focus on the various segments of the population that are too often left behind from innovation and access to skills and services. These are rural populations, women, youth, MSMEs, refugees, migrants, elderly, and the disabled. And building from a place of what gets measured gets managed, we are bringing data to both the segments and these core pillars about the barriers they face, really to help governments and the private sector to better understand their markets, to help frame the problems to address, and to focus on the right priorities. More data is being collected, but there are still gaps really to form a full picture of inclusive digital transformation. And this is why UNCDF has partnered with the EU, UNCTAD, GSMA, UNDESA, UNDP, ADB, and governments in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific to build IDIS and to include relevant proxies and data that can be used to really assess whether and how the digital economy is developing. So I'm just going to go to the next slide here. Sorry, bear with me. So just to talk a little bit more about the tool, there is a problem where a lack of comprehensive, timely, and action-oriented data creates a barrier to really taking a data-driven decision-making approach. And this happens at exactly the time when a lot of governments are under urgent pressure to accelerate national digital economy transformation. And they're early in their journey and they really have to take a running start. So IDIS enters into the picture as an accessible tool, as something that can be used with really low barriers to understand what's happening and which key elements to focus on. Some of the defining features of the tool is that it's metrics driven with flexibility. So it can draw from global data sets by default, and it can also substitute in local data sets that are more trusted or integrated into M&E that's used by policymakers, for example. It's also a tool that can leverage our in-country expertise. So really building on our relationship with the private sector to help inform findings, we can help with scoring and expert assessment on particular areas. But beyond that, UNCDF provides active support to facilitate working groups with the government to validate the data, to internalize findings, and really to support reflection on priority setting at key inflection points. The tool presents data in a comprehensive way. And I think an important thing is that it's an evolving tool. So we have a collaborative approach with this tool so that as needs of policymakers evolve, we can also update the methodology. And for example, in 2022, we launched the Women's Inclusivity Score to bring greater visibility and framing to the barriers that women face in participating in the digital economy. This is all with the several use cases in mind. So we are really looking at how to support policymakers to identify key market barriers, to help set the right priorities, and also to measure and track the development and inclusiveness of the digital economy. Again, I'm just going to go to the next slide here. I want to give you an example now where IDIS is being used. And to do that, I'll zoom into Uganda, which is an early adopter country where policymakers are using IDIS. And this is just a quick snapshot to show, some of the analytics that come out of the scorecard. And if we look here, we can see that the digital economy score in Uganda has made progress year on year, but they still have plenty to do. And what's offered through the framework is also to see that from an inclusiveness perspective, several groups, especially rural communities and women, still experience gaps and face challenges to participate and benefit from the digital economy, and more so for women. And one of the things that came out of the implementation of IDIS in Uganda, and this was shared through a recent community of practice where we brought together 40 policymakers from 15 different countries where we are implementing IDIS to really talk about, how have they started to reflect on these findings and what can they be doing to advance the agenda. They shared, some really interesting insights, which I thought could be informative here. And, there's two ways to look at it. Within each of these holistic building blocks, there are deficits, but then there's also the comparison of the building blocks to see where those deficits are greatest. And in this particular example, we can see that when looking at policy and regulation in the country, they scored very highly, and at the same time, outcomes were falling short in several key areas, such as infrastructure and innovation had decreased despite active government focus on this area. And so one of the key takeaways was that, the many laws and policies, guidelines, and strategies that had emerged over the years as they were dynamically responding weren't being effectively implemented. And so it was really through the comparison on the scores that they were able to identify this as an area for action and review. So we've worked with our partner in Uganda now to really take a comprehensive review of the policies and look for opportunities to streamline them. We're helping with this review and inventory to look for areas where things can be improved from an implementation perspective as well. And so this is one example of how actions have been taken on based on IDIS, but there's other examples, and I'll just name a few where the adoption of a data-driven tool has enabled the operationalization of strategies. So our partner in Uganda, the Ministry of ICT and Digital Transformation, was focused on identifying actions to mainstream digitalization in the National Development Plan when IDIS was first implemented. And based off of the data that was generated, the engagement with the ministry, we were able to work with them to engage the working group that coordinates digital transformation across ministries to both to engage on the findings, but also to adopt it as a baseline for the working group to really ensure that ongoing strategic conversations really reflected both on the priorities and outcomes. A second example is that the Ministry of ICT has also started to use IDIS in linking budget planning across the various regulators, infrastructure authorities, departments, and other departments and ministries which they have responsibility, so that they can create a more focused approach in how budgets are aligning to the priorities that are being articulated in IDIS. So zooming out, we do see quite a few other examples among our partners where IDIS is being used really across the life cycle of policymaking. And There we go. So in particular, using IDAS to inform national digital economy strategies. So being able to quickly reference statistics on what's happening in the market, where the barriers are, to really help set priorities, for example, at the strategy development stage. But also more specifically to identify if, for example, there are deficits around how the cybersecurity is working, or how interoperable infrastructure is being promoted, to really identify constraints hindering development where policy actions can be taken. And we are also supporting partners to do some of these things. And then lastly, to help with the evaluation of strategies to really reflect on whether or not their strategies are having the effect on outcomes that they seek to achieve. So adopting them for monitoring and evaluation. And I think with that, I'll just end on the note that, IDAS really started as a tool and it's expanded to a community of users. We now have a community of practice that is actively discussing how they are measuring the economy, what they can do to really implement more effective policies, and how to lead transformation across government. And central to the approach is this data-driven decision-making process to really get broader agreement and visibility into the challenges facing marginalized groups in the economy. So with that, I do want to hand over to Helen, and I will flip through slides as you need, Helen. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for providing and setting the stage. And one of the big opportunities of the IDAS scorecard is that it essentially provides the initial points of a blueprint for what are the activities. First of all, where do countries, how can they benchmark themselves, either against peers or global good standards, to create that digital, like a thriving digital economy, but also, how can you use it also as a blueprint for moving forward, and how do you address those gaps? And so during this presentation, we want to essentially zoom into one pillar of the digital economy scorecard, particularly around digital finance, and talk around the legal regulatory frameworks that we find are good practices and huge enablers for a digital finance ecosystem, as well as some policy initiatives as well that complement and create a more thriving ecosystem in general. Would you mind moving to the next slide? Perfect. So digital finance, financial inclusion, and the UNCDF. So many people, while we've landed and just started our operations here in Trinidad and Tobago, as the regional office, we have received the question, why focus on fintech and digital finance? And for us, the answer is quite easy. The UNCDF, we believe that financial inclusion, which is essentially the uptake and usage of a range of appropriate financial products and services, both digital and traditional, by individuals and MSMEs, and that's provided in a manner that's sustainable and accessible and safe to the consumer, is a contributing factor towards the Sustainable Development Goals. In general, financial inclusion helps low-income and more marginalized consumers have more economic resilience to mitigate shocks, and then also grow their own economic livelihoods and be able to invest in more income-generating activities, among other strategies to build wealth and to manage wealth longer term. And fintech helps us to achieve many of these key elements, fintech and digital finance, and just different digital financial innovations in general. It helps to make finance more accessible, more usable, particularly because they're able to now come onto someone's mobile phone. There's different applications available. You can potentially make payments around the world using QR codes with linked accounts, etc. It's more accessible because you're able to use a wider range of agent networks as opposed to always walking to your bank branch. It makes products and services more diverse, appropriate, competitive, and also it can help to create more sustainable products as well. And one other question we receive often, and particularly important for small island states, is why digital finance from an inclusion perspective, especially if it's easy to drive 20 minutes and you're, at quite a big point of urbanization, or if you can go from one side to the island fairly quickly as compared to other countries, what's the real need for digital finance? And again, this is where we look at inclusion, because we see lots of marginalized or more vulnerable adults in more rural areas around the region having to essentially expend a lot of time, effort, and money to use transport. And to have to transport themselves. So in essence, these are the reasons why it's important. And I just received a note that we only have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to move a little bit more quickly. So on the next slide, you can see that in essence, the way to build a digitally financial inclusive ecosystem, that there's many different frameworks already available in the market. These two were created by the payments aspects of financial inclusion from the Committee of Payments and Market Infrastructures and World Bank, around how to drive digital payments for financial inclusion. And in essence, since 2016, when the framework first came out by the World Bank and CPMI, it transitioned to what you see on the right as a poppy wheel, which incorporates all of the elements relevant for digital finance. But in essence, how do you really do this? And on the next slide, you can see a slightly adapted framework. And I think in a rapid way, I'm going to explain two basic frameworks around how to create the right policy initiatives, as well as the legal regulatory framework to enable digital finance and fintech, as well as how to create a thriving ecosystem. And while there's no silver bullet framework and there's no right answer, it's generally the confluence of the two where we've seen a lot of success. So I'm just going to briefly mention some of the key points in this house. And Mark, on the next slide, you can see the first. Oh, apologies. And here's the second framework for essentially establishing a thriving fintech ecosystem. And this was adapted by the approach of Singapore, where in essence, you need to create policy initiatives as well as have the legal framework to enable fintechs or other innovations and entrepreneurs to access capital, to be able to operate in the market with the enabling policy environment, to have access to customers, partners, and policymakers. And we're seeing some very encouraging efforts on this front from across the region, as well as opportunity or policy initiatives to nurture business skills and talent. So on the next slide, we're just going to start piece by piece. In essence, one of the biggest foundations is public and private sector commitment. And what does this mean? Generally, there's a driving or a steering force behind creating this agenda that helps to put all these pieces together. And generally, this is an agency either housed within a central bank or within a Ministry of Finance, or multiple agencies as part of a committee that establish either financial inclusion strategies or digital finance roadmaps or digital economy strategies that all have the digital finance portions in place to help create and steer a way forward. It also includes putting in place those adequate data infrastructures, particularly the demand side data, to understand the gaps from consumers and merchants, supply side data generally taken from ministries and in particular the central bank around account ownership, and then geospatial data to understand any types of gaps in accessibility. Then there's generally communication, engagement in international, regional, and domestic forums, for instance, the BTCA or AFI, many of which those in the room today are already aligned with. And then collaboration and coordination. And this is one piece I want to point out, because I think it's a piece that's not always well understood, and also a piece that's incredibly important, which is how do the regulators collaborate with domestic institutions to drive this agenda forward. For instance, what should be some of the role of the regulators? In some countries, regulators take a huge suite of activities under this space. And what should maybe be the role of other institutions and government agencies who might be able to come in and provide, because of different resource capabilities or however the jurisdiction looks in terms of its political environment, it might be able to provide another housing for policy initiatives that otherwise couldn't be held under a regulator. So it's important to keep those in mind, as well as collaboration between the telecommunications sector and the financial sector since many of these digital innovations go through mobile rails. On the next slide, you're going to see a critical piece, and I'm just going to take a little bit of time to explain this one, and then we'll go through the rest a little bit quickly. But since the theme of this entire workshop is around the legal regulatory frameworks, it's important to understand what are really those fundamental blueprint activities which create and enable a digital finance ecosystem. The first being a special licensing window for non-banks to become e-money issuers or to issue some type of e-money account. And in general, these are often provided either through e-money orders or issuance, e-money issuances, or e-wallet orders. There's different terms that we see around the world, but these specialized licensing windows allow non-banks to provide e-money accounts or prepaid or store value accounts without being subject to the full range of prudential rules applicable to commercial banks. And it often includes details around e-float and other prudential safeguards, particularly when this is newer to the market. For instance, e-money issuers who might pose a systemic risk. How can you then mitigate those risks with the particular safeguards in place? For instance, the e-wallet limits, the actual limit of the wallet itself, or being able to ring fence customer funds, etc. And one thing that's very important around non-bank e-money issuance, because I know that many countries have already begun to place e-money orders or e-wallet orders across the region, is flexibility. The e-money order itself does not guarantee effectiveness. Often there's an iterative process that we see around the world in order for regulators to really understand what are the right, as well as policymakers, what are the right types of limits and mitigation activities, along with the right types of requirements to put onto non-banks in order to make this an effective and competitive environment. So the flexibility to make a more effective non-bank e-money framework is incredibly important. And when I mean by flexibility, when I talk about flexibility, what I mean is that, for instance, if you have a set of requirements and a few e-money providers or potential applicants are not able to meet those requirements, that there's a flexible window where you can provide a no objection or an exemption, or sometimes the case of a sandbox for slight variations of that order, or semi-slight, depending on the risk appetite of regulators, in order to understand and to better identify the right risk to, proliferation of e-money issuers in the market, and understanding what the right balance is, and then being able to adjust with either guidance or circulars after. Another very important regulatory aspect is the use of agents, both banks and non-banks, to be permitted to use third-party agents, such as retail shops, etc. And the way that these agents are approved is also very important. We've seen a lot of fallbacks and a lot of constraints around the world when agent approval, the legal framework for agent registration or approvals can be cumbersome. For instance, if a regulator is trying to approve the registration of an agent by agent, or even in small bulk agent approvals and licensing schemes. So it's important to make sure that there is a reality around the number of agents that might come about, and putting in place very well-defined supervision aspects for instance, the e-money operator or the bank to be able to supervise that sector accordingly. Another incredibly important legal enabler is the risk-based customer due diligence, or CDD, proportionate anti-money laundering framework, to allow for lower risk accounts and lower risk transactions to be opened with fewer documentation requirements. Generally around the world, we see this being one ID and a photo that can be verified. And then there's many other ways to verify that now through remote onboarding, etc. And lastly, or the last two or three that are very important from a legal regulatory perspective, is financial consumer protection, particularly the consumer protection rules that are tailored to the full range of DFS providers and products. So for instance, there might be jurisdictions that have already created a consumer protection framework in order to create a holistic financial consumer protection activities between complaint handling, alternative dispute resolution, and market conduct. However, many of those rules and many of those standards have to be reviewed with keeping in mind digital finance, particularly as it includes disclosure, and transparency for the consumer. As a mobile money product is being delivered through your mobile, you're no longer at the point of a branch where you can ask questions to staff members or see things on paper, and you have to be able to really understand and digest that information clearly in order to, be able to feel like you're received all of the capacity needed to make an informed decision. And there's many other tools like key facts or comparison tools that can be leveraged as policy initiatives. Lastly, the two other good practices we see, if you go back, yes, and then I'll quickly move through the rest, is policies or bills that address fintechs. This is generally under the form of a comprehensive fintech bill or a payment system act or central bank acts. In the case of Mexico, it was the fintech law. But in essence, recognizing the current nature of the payments legislation and supervision mandates across the institutions of regulators, and being able to create a more holistic system that includes fintech, cryptocurrencies, payment service providers, etc. And lastly, and one of the other most important, is having opportunities for innovation facilitation as well as acceleration. And we generally see this in the form of sandboxes as well as innovation hubs. So I think I'll stop there. And Mark, if you can just flash through the rest of the slides. And because these slides will be circulated, I understand, to all of the participants, but in the rest of the slides that you're able to just flash through quite quickly, we show some other pieces and some core pieces around what are some of those blueprint activities that you might have to consider in your jurisdiction in order to create an inclusive digital financial ecosystem. Yeah, Mark, I'm not sure if you're able to flash through till the end, but just so that you can get a sense of some of the other pieces of the puzzle. We at the UNCDF are very happy to have had the opportunity to present. And thank you to the honorable ministers in the room. And we do hope, and we want to extend a bit of extend that we are here and our regional office is open for the Caribbean, and we would very much invite anyone who would like to see any type of technical assistance, policy assistance, or even more initiatives to finance digital innovations that have promise for financial inclusion, to reach out to us. We will place our emails and our contact details with Vashti. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen and Mark. I am very sorry you have presented such a wealth of information. And I know that there will be questions from the audience. We could just start off with one from our remote participants. A question was asked, and I think this is directed to Mark, where one of the participants wanted to know why PWDs aren't highlighted as a group targeted for measurement by the IDs system.
Thank you for the question. The groups, the marginalized groups that have been the focus of the digital economy scorecard have really been identified through discussion with our partners. And, we've taken a phased approach to really build out the analytics for marginalized groups over time. The start has been with women. This year, we're going deeper with youth. It's very much demand driven around where our partners are really having the greatest struggle at this moment in time. But I am sure that people with disabilities are on the radar, and I will also reference this with the team as well. So, but if you do have any demand for going deeper on this, I'd love to hear from you and discuss how we could take that further.
Dewey, I see a question from the audience from Cleveland. I believe you have a wireless mic. Yes, please. Go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you so much. Cleveland Thomas from the International Telecommunications Union. First, thanks very much for really excellent presentations that you give. I am wondering that, recognizing that most countries, especially developing countries, small island states, do have some challenges. Challenges as it relates to technical resources, financial capabilities, and perhaps recognizing that, yes, there is this gap between the have and the have-nots. And that there is a view that if you do try to engage in some of the policies and regulations that are critical, which you articulated a few minutes ago, that the countries may not have the capacity really to execute some of these things. And you listed quite a lot. So the question then becomes, what are some of the creative options that might be available to countries? There is a view that perhaps the introductions of policies and regulations may stifle innovation in countries and in the region. And perhaps, Mark, when you look at the Uganda example you give, I take note that you had one policy change after your introduction. I don't know how many policies that you had proposed, and I don't know how long it may have taken even to have that one policy change introduced. So in summary, do you support the view by some that maybe there's no need for policies and regulations given the challenges that some countries are facing at this time? Over to you.
I will just quickly respond, but Helen, please jump in after. I know you've got a vantage point on this as well. Thank you for the question. I think it's a great point, especially, when we think about the example of Uganda, in that situation, what one of the key findings was that the level, all the various regulations and policies were not translating into outcomes in the key areas that they wanted to see results. And so, it was really understood that by reviewing what had emerged, dynamically over time and really looking at how to streamline in order to make the implementation of those policies more effective was in fact, the greater priority, as opposed to, just looking at another policy. But, one of the, I think to your point about how, especially, countries that are smaller, that may have a lower population density, there's just a unique set of challenges. And one of the things that we are finding is that by measuring the digital economy in one country with a standardized framework, and then being able to see how another country is also measuring their digital economy helps our partners to identify across each other who their peers are and who is working from a similar stage of development to really find solutions that are more relevant for them. And this is why we've introduced the community of practice, because a lot of the best practice, a lot of the evidence, the research, it's from huge markets, huge countries, advanced countries where the technology mix, the way in which digitalization can be incentivized with the private sector is just radically different. And so we're really looking at ways to find learning opportunities among more relevant peers. But with that, I will just ask Helen if you want to talk on this as well.
Sure. Thank you very much, Cleveland. I think you bring up an excellent point, many in fact. I think there's a few realities that we also have to consider. One, let's say that there is even a expediting of a particular order or e-money issuance, but then there's not enough capacity to supervise. Do you still license without the capacity and training in place to do the adequate supervision? And there's a lot of different ways to to answer that. On the one hand, there's opportunities to look at some of the global examples of how they've done the supervision of those types of activities, particularly non-bank e-money activities. And I focus on that just because not only is it a big enabler, but it's something that us at the international community and so many countries have so much experience in, that it's something that we believe is kind of more well-known, well-tested and better understood. And so for these areas of fintech and digital finance that are maybe a little bit better understood, a little bit more well-known, particularly around mobile money and non-bank e-money issuance, I think there's opportunity to license or be able to put in place flexibility to even provisionally license or provide a no objection for some of these players to operate, and then taking a careful and considered, 6-month or 1 year or 2 year, however you want to do it, provisional licensing scheme if you want to closely monitor these actors over time prior to issuing some larger guidance. At the same time, there are those sandbox activities. Sandbox is a very good way to essentially tackle what you're mentioning, but at the same time, it's incredibly resource heavy. Sandbox, I know everybody has probably heard the term, a regulatory sandbox, but the thing is that no two sandboxes look alike. And when people are talking about sandboxes, what are they talking about? A sandbox with a capital S in Singapore and in the UK and others have almost 40 to 50 people behind them. And that's why when you see these initiatives coming out around the acceleration and the innovation acceleration, and then they have 20 different calls for regulatory sandbox for different innovations to understand how to test and adopt their regulatory framework accordingly, it is very resourced behind it. And so certainly there shouldn't be, when you are working with regulators and a team of 5 people, for instance, all with shared duties or shared responsibilities, and this is just another one within your job description, you have to take a wildly different approach. And I think the wildly different approaches are moving a little bit more flexibly with the opportunity for some exemptions, no objections, perhaps provisional licensing or sandbox express type tools, which I've much more narrowly defined so that it's not overwhelming to the supervisors or the regulators who will be the ones who have to, keep the stability in the market. Right. And I think someone was just even chatting, there's not a one size fits all. So those are some of the enablers, but it doesn't mean that you need to come at each of these enablers with all of the bells and whistles behind each of those initiatives that we've seen in some countries. There's always a tailored approach that can be taken, and also lighter touch policy tools that can be employed to achieve some of the same goals.
Very much, Helen and Mark, for the amazing presentation and also the wonderful responses. We'd like to thank you for your participation, and hopefully on the next occasion, we will be able to meet you both in person. On that note, as a matter of housekeeping, I have kept you back from coffee for so long. So I'd like to invite everyone to proceed to the coffee break. Light refreshments are served outside. And we will be breaking, unfortunately, for 10 minutes. So that's a quick sip. You can bring your coffee back inside as well as your light eats, because we're a little bit behind schedule and we want to ensure that we're on time, because we do have participants joining us remotely from the Pacific and other regions as well, who's waking up in the middle of the night to see this. So on that note, you're invited to go outside for the coffee break for 10 minutes and we can reconvene. In the interim, however, you can go ahead. What we don't want to leave our online participants out. So we're going to try to arrange a group screenshot that we'll also be able to share with everyone after. So I'd ask IT if they can do the share screen for the participants. IT. I would like to just kindly ask if we can push on. So our next presenter, 1 second, if you can just put up his bio. So our next presenter is Mr. Regan Askarali, our rock star intellectual property controller, very passionate, very driven. Mr. Askarali focuses and heads the Intellectual Property Office in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And I would like to now invite him to the podium to do his presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Just to let you know, I used to be in a rock band indeed, 20 years ago. And in those days, you know, intellectual property was something we were passionate about. And it was a construct for legal firms and a few lawyers. And it was very difficult really to manage your IP. And coming out of the Faculty of Law, Cave Hill, 1999, you know, when we clamored for IP and how we could really help SMEs or artists. And fast forwarding now where you have the Super Bowl. Who watched the Super Bowl last night? And who watched the Super Bowl halftime show? More importantly, there you go in the back there. Yeah, because Rihanna was amazing with bumping into and gave such a performance doing the Caribbean proud. And this is what the creative industries, the digital trade and economy is about. Rihanna's brand, Fenty, is $1 billion brand. What underpins that brand? Intellectual property, not the brick and mortar assets, but the worth of that intangible collateral asset. And how has she exploited it? Using digital trade, online, being able to exploit the Madrid Protocol in 125 countries and going. Caribbean members and Commonwealth members are members of the Madrid Protocol, where with that brand, Fenty, you have access to all those countries, one language, one currency, payments, all done online. In Trinidad and Tobago, we are looking at the Global Carnival Showcase, and I'm coming home for Carnival, right? So Carnicon, a Global Carnival Showcase, looking at our best ways of franchising the Carnival, using the Madrid Protocol, using designs, talking about IP, and having this exported through our what? Our trade, our British Economic Partnership Agreements, the European Union Economic Partnership Agreement, and taking it to the world. So IP, you know, I want to recognize my permanent secretary, Ms. Natasha Barrow of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, and the Honorable Attorney General of St. Vincent, just to let you know, sir, that, you know, the St. Vincent and Grenadines and intellectual property is doing amazing, you know, and my colleague, Lakeisha, we have many conversations and just looking at UPOV, another aspect of IP, and how you're looking at that for even cannabis, as you know, new plant variety protection. So IP, the expressed creations of the human mind, right? The Secretary General earlier spoke about chat, and he used chat, an artificial intelligence device, to write his speech. Do you think that that would attract IP, meaning an artificial intelligence generator can have intellectual property and be owned? Because there are cases on that now being argued whether AI should be afforded IP or should it be traditional owners of intellectual property. Any takers? Not yet. So I'll go through because I have 15 minutes for this presentation. So it's sponsored by Geico, 15 minutes for insurance. Right. So here we are, right? I want to talk about this beautiful macaque, right? This beautiful macaque, Naruto. His photographer friend, Mr. David Slater, the human being, was taking photographs, and then he decided to actually press the camera, and take these most perfect still shots of himself. And the Society for the Prevention of the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, decided, hey, the Naruto selfies, we can exploit the copyrights. because Naruto should be able to own his IP. What do you think about that? Is it that he should be able to own his IP or an AI device like chat should own IP? Well, guess what? The judge found that intellectual property is not monkey's business, as beautiful as he is. It's the express creations of the human mind. So inherent in what I've said is the definition, right? So there you go. There was an agreement by Mr. Slater that, he, from the proceeds of the copyright, he would give back to the sanctuaries for the macaques. So it was a win-win situation. Moving along, the types of IP. So in my 15-minute presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about trademarks. I've spoken about it. Rihanna's brand, the Canacon Global Carnival Showcase. We could think of so many brands in our region and in the Commonwealth that have done well. In fact, in Trinidad and Tobago right now, we are in the process of protecting the trademark for the Commonwealth Games, Youth Games, that is coming later this year, and looking at merchandise and all these things that will encompass the intellectual property. Because IP, what is it? It's the air that we breathe. Inventions, patents. Somebody told me, it's a very difficult construct. It has to be novel, have an inventive step. It has to be useful. And it seems to be the forte of corporations. Well, in this global digital economy, you can have SMEs. You can have individuals who have successfully been able to get patent protection. And some of my slides, I'll go through that. Industrial designs, the ornamental aspect of an article. Some of the perfume bottles that the permanent secretary uses, for instance, with these unique shapes are protected by IP. Closer to home, you have the chubby bottle, SM Jalil. I see we have aqua here. The chubby bottle with its unique shape is protected by intellectual property. As I've said, it's the air we breathe, right? It's all around us. And then you have GIs, This is so important in the digital environment, whether it's a Trinitario cocoa, Jamaica's Blue Mountain coffee, Demerara sugar, and so many other examples in the Commonwealth, looking at our inherent agricultural products from our agricultural regions with unique characteristics. That's what geographical indications are. And when you ring fence it into a strategy, and then you go through a digital trade, basically you're bringing our culture, what we do best to the world, especially in the Commonwealth, rich in culture from South Africa, where I've been, Zimbabwe, so many cultural products, right? And of course, the old man on this side, I call him an old man, copyright and related rights. Why? Copyright protects what? Original literary, dramatic, and artistic works, music, and neighboring rights. So in one catchphrase there, you have what copyright encompasses. Such a rich milieu of protection available. So, we're talking about fintech here. Right here in Barbados, there's successful fintech companies. I've researched Carryland. So what goes into these things? You have brands. It protects against infringement if somebody came with something similar sounding to that fintech brand. It assists with due diligence and trademarks. And very, very importantly, a trademark could be licensed, could have exclusive distributorships, and also you can also protect it across the board in different areas. So what makes a trademark unique? Well, I'll give you an example of what is not unique. The best fish cakes. I thought that one there was pretty good that we just had, right? But if I was trying to apply for the brand, the best fish cakes, will I get that? No. The Attorney General nods quite correctly, the Honorable Attorney General. Or the best doubles closer to home. It does not identify itself as a source identifier of goods. 20 years ago, our lawyers wanted to have Blackberries, and now I have got 2 iPhones, right? Would you believe? One for work and one to keep the time in my 15-minute speech, and I've had to truncate, right? So, trademarks, a sign that is graphically represented. That's the modern language, right? And in that, you can have trademarks for your image, your caricature. You can have sound trademarks, you can have touch trademarks, and you have the traditional slogans. So how are we going to unlock in rock star fashion or hard fat fashion, to borrow Bunji's term, because we're in carnival time, the power of IP to really take our culture in the region and the Commonwealth to the world, right? Patents, protecting technology, trade secrets. You all know about the Angostura bitters. It's one of the best kept trade secrets. What keeps it secret? Contracts, how they set it up, right? And it's very important sometimes in the restaurant industry, our chefs with their trade secrets, many of them get what you call sweat equity, sweating over the fire, but you made a part owner because of the importance of the intellectual property in those trade secrets and what it brings to the value of that corporation, that restaurant. And of course, copyright, fintechs, what makes that proprietary software unique? The copyright protection for the source code, as opposed to maybe source code that would be in the public domain that everybody could use. So this gives you an advantage, intellectual property. Once you use it and learn to use it, it gives you an advantage for your SMEs, for the governments that unlock the regulatory clauses that are so important. And we've come a long way from 95 and 96 when TRIPS came along, trade-related aspects of IP. And we put all of these in the IP offices in the Caribbean and in many Commonwealth countries into the law, the TRIPS provisions, including in Trinidad and Tobago in 1997 that birthed the Intellectual Property Office. So when you follow the TRIPS provisions, you would see very important articles that can be used, such as the Geneva Act for our unique shapes of articles, industrial designs, where you have access to 80 countries. So unique packaging from the Caribbean, being able to protect. And I spoke about the Madrid or even the e-filing for patents. E-filing services are all there for IP. Think of it. We in the IP office of Trinidad and Tobago now have over 500 SMEs signed up with online accounts. They file and they can pay for their mark in 5 minutes. And this is where unlocking the potential of IP has to go. Thank you. Geico is now cut by a third. Yes. Yes, I can. So trademarks, rituals, the story of Marius Abgerbu. How did this happen? I was the legal counsel in a firm at the time. And it was said coffee could not work in the Caribbean. But he persisted and, we did some distributorship agreements. And then he was looking for a name. He went to his wife, or partner, like many of us might go for inspiration. Mr. Khan, I think definitely inspiration there. Yes. And she said, Mario, what does coffee mean to you? And he simply replied, it's my ritual. Back in those days, Rituals was born. You had to go through 35 offices, go to 35 different lawyers. Lawyers are important, but not so important, HE. And different translations and these, to be able to take this to the region. Now, with the Madrid Protocol, if we acceded, Trinidad and Tobago is a member, Jamaica, Suriname has acceded, Antigua and Barbados was the first, and we need more Caribbean countries to really look at this and unlock it. Cuba also is a member in our region. So this brand has gone throughout the hemisphere, right? And it has all of these assets used as a sign of endorsement, enabling licensing, etc. Very powerful trademark in the region, right? And I spoke about the best doubles. This is your slide. So I don't need to speak, right? Make sure it doesn't designate the kind, quality, or purpose. A hotel for 5-star, no, would not be protected as a trademark, but you can have elusive marks, right? A great example of trademark I spoke about, Carnicon, the Global Carnival Showcase. So here, if you look at this slide, which will be for everyone, it kind of gives a guide as to how to look at brands, and looking at trademarks, because this is fintech and different areas of new technologies. I've pulled this from the database of the IP Office of Trinidad and Tobago, where it has been registered PAPR, which is owned by TSTT, for downloadable e-wallets, for provision of online marketplace for buyers, electronic funds transfer. It was hot off the press. And it was the license was granted just last week. So the IP Office is your best tool. It keeps all your secrets, literally. And it has to work in tandem with your economy. So because it'll take one slip up And then, you launch your brands, etc. You're on the back foot. And then you're calling the lawyers, and the lawyers have to be like Mahomes at the Super Bowl last night, right? So look at the junction. You know what this does? I'm coming home for Carnival, like some of us. The junction literally connects you to all the mass bands in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's doing, it. You're shaking your hand, great. Yeah, you're shaking the head there. Yeah, it connects you to all your mass bands. If you're lost, you can go back to one. If you want to wine in our next band, sorry, that's a Trinity term. You can even find the other bands. It also connects all the parties, helps you with rideshare services, bringing the carnival together through e-commerce platform, the brand protected, the source code protected by contract, and all of these things. This is IP in motion, this is what it's about. And then this is the junction here, their latest ad. We have what you're looking for. Very interesting slogan, right? Play on some terms, all in a back pocket in your phone, connecting the Carnival of Trinidad and Tobago and doing work in the region. And I spoke about patents. This is a workshop, and I'm sorry, I have 15 minutes because I would have made you all pull out your laptops and do some work where we can search for any technologies, right? Through understanding patent information services, right? So Google Patents, I went to Google Patents, the simplest one, and I put in patents for electronic monetary system. We're going to be talking about that this week, right? So as simple as Google Patents, what the search found: methods and systems for exchanging and transferring various forms of value. You pulled up these search reports, and if you use some of the patent databases that IP offices can teach, then you can actually find any technology. If it's not protected in the region or in the country, you can actually use some of this technology. So this is what underpins IP, very importantly. I remember once a young lawyer said, well, you don't practice law. And I said, well, don't you go into court every day and you argue American cyanamide for your injunction? And she said, yes. And I said, well, that's a patent case, right? Okay. So very important, intellectual property, right? The air we breathe. So EPC, right? European patent applications. You pull up the different fintech, the different owners, and it tells you so much about what's happening in this environment of e-commerce, right? Yeah. And so electronic monetary system, for time, I'm going to leave everybody to read that. It's quite a bit, but in an abstract for a patent, it's very important to describe what it is, right? And then you look at these different areas. So patents, what it protects, not an acronym. It must be novel. It must have an inventive step. It must have usefulness. You don't have a patent for a parachute on one's head. Wouldn't be very useful. Just take off the head, right? So when you think about what a patent is, an exclusive right granted for an invention, which is a product or process in general, a way of doing something. Is it hard? It can be sometimes, but sometimes you have many great examples. So speeding along, because I've got 5 minutes on my car insurance left, I just want to highlight some personalities because let's bring this alive further. Rona Eastman Jack is a seamstress in Tobago, Susulands. She was able to get protection for this collapsible ruler, the Udazzle ruler that you see on the screen. And she was able to get patent protection through an MOU that the government of Trinidad and Tobago has with Chile. It's one of the international patent search and examination authorities, bringing the cost of IP down. If it's one thing as legislators we have to look at, e-services, bringing the cost of these things down, bringing it to our SMEs and showing how it's not a legal construct from 20 years ago in firms, and then seeing how it can be effective. We have moved from 100% paper filing to 98% online filing, of which the majority are local SMEs, women and others, because we demystify the IP system. And that is through no small feat of a fantastic legal team, as it then was, of the PS Barrow, with Ms. Vashti Maharaj, that has continued with Solange and others, driving us forward and seeing the vision. So in my 3 minutes, how does it impact us? Look, 5% of the GDP, and in many other Commonwealth countries, comes from the creative industries, comes from digital trade, comes from our music, our language, our culture, our traditional knowledge, our brands. And when we can really use IP to protect this, ring fence it, that is 5% of jobs. And it survives even in the worst of times like the pandemic. Whether it was Jamaica came in at 5% with its rich cultural heritage, or Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent. This is what we have to look at in terms of economic diversification. You know, ministries of innovation and stuff pushing the way forward. So, and this is a further breakdown of how it impacts. When you map the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, it's going to happen in a week's time. You map all the other carnivals worldwide. You map our creative festivals, you see how it contributes, right? So how now an intellectual property office can really unlock this potential? You have, all of us have industrial property systems where it's online, you can file, and they have the potential to build out. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has now gone further with services in the cloud. Trinidad and Tobago is following with IP services in the cloud. You know, then there's the WIPO Publish for filing online, WIPO File and others. So it is amazing. Long ago, we had to look at books. Now we can just accept hundreds of marks in a day. I sit with my examiners in what I call an intellectual property panchayat. And we sit, you understand that? Yes. And yes, very Commonwealth term. And we just go through files and accept. And what that does, it multiplies and brings confidence to your offices because you can get things done 10 times faster than the traditional people. So it's one thing to look at. We have to modernize because this is serious money that we sit on, right? And this is what I spoke about earlier. This is the potential. The IP office of Trinidad and Tobago went from 5.4 million to 10 million in 2 years during the pandemic, unlocking this. We are revenue earners and we support the global economy of our legislators. And even in this conference at D3, if I remember, there's talk about ADR and how you can unlock the digital divide. Because conflict is money time. Lawyers make more money, yes. But imagine mediation. There's the WIPO Mediation Center to deal with these disputes, franchising and fintech and patents and all of those things, all online at some of the cheapest rates. We should be looking at this to support our domain name disputes and other areas, right? Intellectual property for business, in my 10 seconds left, right? The IP diagnostics for SMEs. How powerful if we utilize the power of our SMEs, put in regulations for online filing, online systems, as these regulations show you, not rocket science, right? All of these that I'm going to leave, and very importantly, unlock the power of our treaties through TRIPS, the Madrid, the Hague, the Marrakesh, the Beijing, and all of these things that Mr. Khan looking at me with the time going. Here it is. So with that said, the global route to global branding. This is what the conversation is about. Global branding for entrepreneurs, Trinidad and Antigua. And I end with Carnacon and our Attorney General with WIPO's representative. And so I am here to take, am I allowed questions? Yeah.
Regan, so thank you as always for an innovating presentation. And I'd just like to give one person in the audience the lucky question because we just have time for one question. Yes.
I wish I had more time as well.
I think you just, if you could introduce yourself and just speak into the microphone.
My name is Mohammed Awais and I work at the Commonwealth Secretariat. So what is the Caribbean view on prior informed consent, benefit sharing, and traditional knowledge?
Beautiful question. You know, Pakistan, West Indies, fantastic collaboration in the cricket field.
Yeah. So these and
so let me be quick because
as a country or maybe as a region, are you preparing any database of traditional knowledge?
Yes. So okay, there's several. You know, I speak. I didn't have time, but you know, when you look at a repo in the Commonwealth, what they've done with regional IP systems, with the manual protocol and all those kind of systems where now there's more regionalism, and that's where we have to unlock Article 66. It speaks to industrial property collaboration at the regional level. For CARICOM, to answer your question, the heads of IP and the technocrats are currently engaged in putting those provisions into a Caribbean Patent Convention, which we hope will be finalized in the next year. We also just settled Caribbean Copyright Management Organization regulations. We're also looking at the feasibility of a Caribbean trademark office and these things. So there's a lot of work going on at the CARICOM level, but certainly in the patents, that's where you can unlock the regional patent, which should be very useful because it's jurisdictional. And if you look at prior informed consent, where very importantly, traditional knowledge and these things, there is a balancing act between that, the prior art, the need to exploit, but also to protect the interests of our, traditional persons, craftsmen, all the different ideas. So it is being given full attention. And, I would mention the work of Dr. Marcus Goff in that respect. When in the Kingston Ministerial in 2018, there was a lot of work that happened to make sure that PIC and these things could find a place in a convention at the regional level. At the international level, of course, the IGC goes to a diplomatic conference. We all participated in that and celebrated that in the Commonwealth in June last year, looking at how we can have an international instrument to protect these areas. And with that said, I want to thank everyone. Remember what I've said, take our SMEs forward with e-commerce and these, it is quite possible, it can be done. And we owe it to our artists. I didn't get time to even talk about IP collateralization, using that, the worth of your copyrights to help our artists in the Caribbean and their wintry years. It is so important, and there are projects in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago through the IDB looking at how we can collateralize. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Regan, for a very, very vibrant and thought-provoking presentation. At this time, I'd like to proceed to our panel discussion, and I'd like to invite our panelists to join us this morning up front. I'm introducing our chair of our panel, Mr. Chris Southworth, who is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce for the United Kingdom. And also with us in person is Mr. Warwick Ward, the Chief Executive Officer of the Financial Services Commission of Barbados. Joining us virtually is going to be Mr. John Outridge, the Chief Executive Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Corporation, as well as Felicity Jarforta, Country Manager of Z Money Barbados. If we can just give them a warm welcome while IT puts up the screen for our virtual presenters. IT? But while they're doing that, I think I can hand over to Chris, who will do his intro and take it from here.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Chris Southworth. As Bashti's already introduced, a little bit more about me tomorrow, where I'll be doing a full session on regulatory frameworks and standards toolkits for cross-border trade. Can I just confirm whether we have Felicity on the line? Do we know if she's with us in the session? Yeah, John's on. John is on. Hi, John.
Hi, morning, everyone.
Brilliant. Well, while we're waiting to see if Felicity's with us, let's just start off with John and Warwick, if I can. So we're just going to talk broadly about fintech, sandboxing, sorry, not sandbag, sandboxing. Too much time on the beach yesterday, I think. What are these terms? Because I think sometimes they get used very loosely, and it's not always entirely clear what we mean by either. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time just trying to define those, and then talk a little bit about the sort of regulatory environment around, particularly around the sort of fintech's finance and what that means for B2C and B2B in terms of cross-border trade, which is where I come from. So I'm just going to, before we get started, just ask Warwick and John just to introduce themselves. If I can come to you, John, first on the screen. Can you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what your interests are for this session.
Yeah, sure. And I just want to start off. I think it was very unfair for this panel to have to follow Regan Adgarali with his energetic presentation, but hopefully we could maintain that. Hello to all the persons attending. Sorry I couldn't make it in person. So I am John Aldridge, the Chief Executive Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago International Finance Center. And basically, we are a government state agency under the Ministry of Finance. And our objectives is really about pushing Trinidad and Tobago towards a cashless society. And we are sort of executing on that plan by sort of focusing on three core objectives that are basically related. Accelerating the digitalization of payments across the public sector, working to increase the financial inclusion levels within society, so really focusing on the unbanked and the underbanked. And then by pushing those two objectives, one of the sort of realities we were faced with is we realized that there's an absolute need, and I guess this panel will sort of address it in terms of having Fintech really play a sort of key role in terms of providing the capabilities for the traditional finance sector, but also at the same time, what I would call designing the experiences and the applications and the interfaces for the citizens and for customers to really use these solutions, to really see it as a sort of shared objective.
Thanks very much, John. And Warwick, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this session, which I think is a quite important session given, where digital economy is going. We heard this morning about financial inclusion. I think is very relevant to our side of the world and our countries that are represented here. My name obviously is Warwick Ward, the Chief Executive Officer of the Financial Services Commission. This is day 18 of my recent sojourn at the FSC. I've re-entered the fray there, and I think that we are the non-bank regulator, meaning along with the central bank, we are responsible for ensuring the regulation of the entire financial system in Barbados. So with that, I would just like to leave it to the questions and our discussion to learn a little bit more about what we are doing with Fintech. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Warwick. John, if I can come to you with the first question, can you just explain what do you mean by fintechs? What does that actually mean? Are we talking about B2C here? Are we talking about B2B, business to business, or are we talking about all of it? Or where are the parameters around that term?
Yeah, that's a good question. And from being at the IFC just over a year now, when you heard about fintech, typically as it relates to not just even Caribbean wide, but globally, you were largely talking about payments, right? You were largely talking about peer-to-peer type payments and so forth. But in the work that we have been doing, we realize that the term fintech has actually sort of expanded a lot more. So, when I say fintech, I am talking about basically where we have seen, even I would say what I'm sort of observing regionally, where you had traditional technology companies, ICT companies, sort of pivoting to really provide what I would call consumer-facing, customer-facing type applications, sitting on top of your sort of core banking, sitting on top, leveraging the rails of the Visas and the MasterCards and so forth. So fintech basically, from what I'm seeing, is really sort of expanded to providing what I would call the rails between the financial sector and your sort of citizen, business and government and the various use cases.
Yeah, I think it's quite a complex growing space, isn't it? Certainly in the trade environment over the last 5 years, we've seen fintechs play almost a zero role in trade finance delivery to a 20 to 30% of all trade finance delivery. Now the large trade banks biggest in the world are now seriously talking about disintermediation completely because of the role of fintech. It's incredibly, really important kind of space. To my next term, Warwick, can I come to you?
Sure.
I'll get it right this time. Sandboxing.
Sandbox, not sandbagging.
Not sandbagging. Sandboxing, what do we mean by that? Because that's another one that gets thrown around a lot.
Sure. I mean, if you think about what is a sandbox traditionally, it is basically a space that you set out for your kids to play in, where they will be monitored. They'll make sure that nothing happens. You can see what they're doing, and that they don't wander off outside of your view. So you think of that as for the fintech, the sandbox is really a space, a remote space that has been set up for new and emerging technologies, where the regulator might not be, totally au fait of these complex, how they work. And so you want to make sure that they're in a remote space where they don't pose a risk to the system or to the consumers. And it also allows for, within a live space, it allows for the feedback to these new entities or these innovative entities. And so that once you're sure, or you have some sort of comfort that they don't pose a risk to the system, then you can allow them to operate within the system freely. So basically, it's just a remote space where they can be observed, the new technologies could be observed, and also that you're aware of the types of risk that are in place within a live environment.
Spaces to play, I like that. That's great. Innovation is obviously a big part of this. John, can I come to you? In terms of success, what does success look like for you in 2 to 3 years? And if I can sort of double up on that question, where are you looking for best practice? What sort of lessons are you drawing from, and where are you drawing them from?
Sure. And, it's where, if I had to look at it, it's not only a sort of Trinidad and Tobago challenge, right? It's a regional challenge. It's one of the things that we are doing at the TTIFC, because when you look across the region, I believe our problems are largely the same, right? There is a huge challenge when it comes to having effective strategies, capabilities to deal with the unbanked and the underbanked, right? I believe it's the same across all the way up to Bahamas, right? You simply don't have the uptake of these sorts of technologies. And when you think about it, in recent times, the Caribbean, the region has been leading in a lot of ways globally in terms of, the Bahamas and even in the OACS launching CBDC pilots, right? And I believe they are at the phase right now where they're sort of reevaluating, looking at the uptake, looking to how to expand on it, right? But I'm not telling tales out of school, but I don't think the uptake has been sort of phenomenal, right? And again, it goes back to the fundamental sort of core hypothesis, right? And this is when we talk about fintech, right? What it is exactly we are trying to solve within the region, right? We know cash is a big issue. We understand the challenges we have in terms of the European Union, the OECD ratings and so forth. We understand, the FATF and the counter-terrorism financing aspects that cash sort of leads to the shadow economy and so forth. So if I had to look in the next 2 to 3 years, and again, when you look at the fintech ecosystem, there was recently a convention that took place in Barbados last year, I believe, late last year, called Fintech Islands. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it then, but I was remarking to someone that if that conference happened a year ago, you'd probably have 5 people in the room. But that conference had over 200 people attending, and you had a large contingent of what I call fintech companies within the region, the Island Pays, the We Pays, the PAYs. You had a lot of fintech entities showing up, all doing work penny pinch. Every Caribbean island had a fintech representative attending that conference, and they all working at providing what I would call solutions, use cases to dealing with that unbanked aspect of it. So if I had to look 2, 3 years from now, I definitely think the Caribbean is a vibrant market for incubating fintech because of the fact that we have this large challenge of the unbanked, and there's clearly a disconnect with how people see their relationships with what I call the traditional financial institutions. And I do believe that the fintech revolution is really going to help the Caribbean and the banking sector sort of deal and increase the levels of financial inclusion.
Thanks very much, John. And Warwick, if I can come to you. this idea of fintech islands, I like that too. How do we kind of foster this fintech community across an island network, for one, or you could actually replicate that across any global region, in fact. How do we do that? How do we scale solutions, ideas? You and I were talking slightly before that, there's a big governance gap at times between where the private sector is and where government regulations are and laws are often far, far behind, in some cases, way back to the 1800s. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. So how do we foster a legal policy environment in order for this to flourish?
Yeah, I mean, I like that question, and I actually listened to Helen's presentation this morning, which was quite a good presentation. And if you remember, the Attorney General, he spoke about a piece of legislation that we worked on. I was also on that committee way back in 2000. And none of the banks were interested. As we just heard, you didn't see any sort of uptake or urgency towards dealing with e-banking or e-commerce. Within the past 5 years, 6 years, we have seen this exponential growth. And I have to think about, the legal principles around any type of regulation, especially as it deals with fintech. Necessity. Is it necessary that we have, what type of regulation? Is it necessary to be regulated? For us, obviously, yes, because we have to think about the systemic risk, and we also have to think about those same individuals or consumers who are, we are catering for in terms of financial inclusion. They're usually the ones that are affected most whenever there's a crisis or something happens within the industry. Proportionality. This is where you tend to have a little challenge. Is the effort that is being made by the regulator, is it proportional to the risk? And once we're able to get that done correctly, we should be able to come up with a flexible enough, sounds like an oxymoron, a flexible enough legislation that can deal with, the type of risk that we currently see. Legal certainty. We want to make sure, and we have all the time, a lot of the entities, the new entities, the innovative entities, they come to us and they want to know what is it that we need to do in order to be regulated. And one of the challenges that we have, which I will also speak about later, is we also need that type of infrastructure internally, the capacity, the technical capacity, as well as the human capacity, to be able to understand what sort of risks are being posed by these new entities, which sometimes, as a regulator, we're not able to properly understand. And that's where sometimes the sandbox becomes that opportunity for us to properly understand what it is that they're doing. And obviously, we want to make sure it is an efficient piece of legislation. It adds some efficiency in order to, and that goes along with the flexibility in order to make sure that it comes at the right time, the right pace, and the right amount of weight of the law. So these are the key things which I think should go into any piece of legislation. Of course, we sometimes don't have that flexibility because a lot of the current laws are set for bricks and mortar. They don't contemplate this type of innovation. And so that's the challenge. If we're able to have legislation that allows for this sort of flexibility, but it requires a framework. And so in order for that to operate properly, we need to have the framework properly understood and implemented and followed so that we could meet all of these various innovative elements. And it will change all the time, it will change. So we need to think about how we will structure the legislation to allow for that flexibility outside of sunset-based legislation or sunset-type legislation.
And just before I go to John, I mean, just on the back of that, because that's one of the points I'm throwing around in my head is, do we just need a different environment for digital that allows for more dialogue on a constant rolling basis, more dynamic environment between regulators, government, and industry, Or do we still follow the traditional processes?
Yes, I'll give way as well. But yes, I think we need to have that type of dialogue. But of course, it requires, again, coming back to frameworks, coming back to the capacity, coming back to these things to make sure that everyone is stepping on the same page, or moving lockstep, and it don't always happen that way. So that's one of the challenges that we currently face. I think that the sandbox idea works, but again, you need to have the parameters around the sandbox type idea to make sure that everyone understands why we have it and how it will function most effectively. So that's a start in order to get that sort of collaboration, but it is not the end all and be all, because you still have, outside of that, you still have the legislative process to follow.
Which in itself can take a long time as well, right?
Correct.
John, I mean, the companies and the organizations and stakeholders you engage with, if there's sort of two things that they ask for, or two barriers that they come against all the time that you hear about the most, what are they?
No, I think you guys kind of set it up very nicely for me, because exactly that conversation you were having was the sort of problem statement and the hypothesis that led us to basically start an initiative which we will be launching at the end of June within Trinidad and Tobago in terms of Fintech Innovation Hub. Because exactly what Mr. Ward was describing there, particularly, when you look at the rules of engagement and things are changing so quickly, and regulatory certainty is something, again, that is always required, but there's so much energy and there's so much investment and excitement around this sector, right? I could imagine it is probably occupying majority of central bankers' times going forward, right? And, even coming back to your question in terms of some of the queries that we get, right? We realize that you have a lot of people who have ideas, right? And they're observing externally and they're seeing opportunities where they could play a role and provide a solution, but they don't quite understand themselves, the parameters, even if they require regulatory supervision then, based on what they are looking to do. And we realize that whole education aspect and helping to even refine their business models and even understanding what they want to do and even providing what I would call sort of pre-guidance before the sandbox stage. Because I'm sure Mr. Ward could probably attest, because we hear about it even in our jurisdiction. You have a lot of people approaching the regulators without even knowing if what they're proposing needs to be regulated. It's a lot of ideas, it's a lot of ideation, but it's not yet a real company, right? It's not yet proven, it's still at the proof of concept prototyping phase. So this is why we saw the need to kind of make that investment, and we are partnering with the United Nations Capital Development Fund. Helen, I think she's still on the call, to really provide that facility and that service to help fintechs understand exactly what are you trying to do, what are you trying to achieve, who you are trying to address, and to kind of streamline that sort of process. So if I had to answer, the two things that we hear about is, one, we would like to understand how can we do business in Trinidad and Tobago. And from that, I think every fintech doesn't want to do business in one island, right? Everybody has a pan-Caribbean vision. Because when you look at the Caribbean, on the English-speaking side, we're talking about 6 million people, right? The Caribbean itself is a very, very small market, but it's a very, very important, what I would call proven ground for fintech, not just in the region, but for companies external, because you have a lot of new solutions. The established markets are very saturated. The entire industry is looking for what I call emerging economies, where they could plug in their solutions, get their proof of concepts, and then that allows them to sort of scale outward. So the two things that we constantly hear is, obviously trying to figure out whether they need to be regulated or not be regulated, and then understanding what I would call the regional ecosystem then. How do they plug in? What's the situation with the banks? What's happening in the payment systems? Is there talent on the ground? Is there other fintechs that we can talk to? So this is why we're trying to sort of bring those three components together in a hub: that network effect, access to talent, and then obviously the understanding in terms of how we should operate, or even, which bucket you should fit into.
Yeah, so it's a really good point that around industry can be very inarticulate at times, can't it, in terms of wanting to do something but not being very articulate about what it is that it's asking, which makes it very difficult from a government point of view or an agency point of view to solve. Just a lot of the problems we talk about around fintechs, the market itself, whether it's dealing with fraud, whether it's dealing with AML, KYC bureaucracy, digital identity adoption, fintech partnerships with banks. There's an endless long list of opportunities, but a lot of it actually is nothing to do with government. It's got to do with industry leadership, and the industry itself can solve a lot of these problems, albeit with some support from an enabling legal policy framework. How much would you like to see the industry take the lead more? Or do you think that, are they waiting for you and you're waiting for them? Is this a chicken and an egg?
Yeah, it's always a chicken and an egg question. But I think, I don't think the industry will actually, they're actually waiting for us. And I'm happy when we see a proof of concept come to us. It is the ones where there isn't a proof of concept and they don't come to us that we tend to get very worried about. Because if they come to us, it means that they want to be regulated, and there's a degree of credibility that they will see as part of being regulated. So again, I think the industry themselves, they're interested in making sure on a general scale that they're on the right path. So I don't think the issue is one or the other. What needs to happen is everyone to sit together and understand, what it is that the regulator is responsible for and what they're trying to do and trying to achieve. And also from the industry side, we understand that, there are significant benefits to be had from these innovative concepts. But sometimes the complexity of the activity itself lends to challenges which the industry themselves are not fully aware of in terms of the impact that it can have. A lot of the risks that we see are not old risks. They're simply the mode at which they occur is different. But you still have the same issues: operational risks, governance challenges, credit risk, privacy. These are always available, are always the risks that you will see under any type of system, even bricks and mortar banking. It's just how it is done and the mode at which it impacts on the same individuals that we're looking to help in the financial inclusion, as well as they might have a knock-on effect for the system. So that is really what we like to have a handle on early before we release this type of industries into the full market.
John, if I can come to you, you've got a room full of people across this amazing Commonwealth set of nations that we're all part of. If there's one thing that you think we should all go away with, what would that be?
If I had to give one thing to sort of go with, and you're right, the Commonwealth has done an excellent job. Even last year, when they presented their Fintech toolkit, and we facilitated a session here in Trinidad and Tobago with regulators, governments, private sector in the room, I recognize, and I think I saw it in the chat here, that, there's a lot of new terminology. There's a lot of new models, this is definitely, the ground is still moving here in fintech. And it's not something I would like to leave with, but I think it's something that I would like to encourage more of in terms of dialogues around what I call this financial inclusion challenge that we are having. I think fintech is absolutely a subset of it, but I think financial inclusion and sort of having more conversations at a regional level and understanding what, and as I said, even at a Commonwealth level, right? Because again, when you look at India and what India is experiencing and what they have gone through, it largely resembles a lot of what you see happening in the region. That's obviously at scale, right? So I do think the Commonwealth has the ability to really sort of share in those experiences and really help put these financial inclusion programs, taking those lessons learned. But I think my sort of ask is not necessarily a takeaway, is that we definitely need, I would like to see more discussions and more support forthcoming, particularly within the region in terms of dealing with those challenges. I think that's a gap, and I think that is a tide I think will lift all boats, even as we relate to fintech and the whole digital transformation of government, etc.
And what about you, Warwick, in terms of the sort of Commonwealth collaboration? We're seeing some fantastic examples coming out of India and Singapore, aren't we, at the moment, particularly, but all over the Commonwealth, there's lots of innovation going on. What would you say would be the thing we should take away with what's the action, call to action?
Yeah, I would just say ditto. I think we need to collaborate more. We need to have more and more regular meaty discussion with regards to where we're going, sort of like a roadmap. I know there isn't what we can say right now as an end point, but we need to have more of a roadmap as to where we expect to go and the milestones along which where we expect to go in the future. One of the things that we have at the within the FSCs is the Fintech Advisory Committee, which is made up of industry, trade, regulators, and they sort of advise us with regards to new techniques, new initiatives, new things that are happening within the fintech space. And this sort of collaboration will help us or guide us in terms of what type of regulation we are providing to the industry. So I think that's in essence what we'll be looking for.
Brilliant. Well, roadmaps and more collaboration.
If it's possible, could we move towards some questions from the audience?
Sure. Yeah, and then questions and answers. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we can go straight to Q&A now if you want. Yeah.
And we also have.
So we do have a question that we received online. 1 second. What role does the TTIFC aim to play with regard to supporting the enabling legal and regulatory environment to enable fintech to thrive? And do you plan on working with regulators together to foster that ecosystem?
Sure. And I think the term that we are ideating in our head is really around capacity building. Because as Mr. Watts was saying, right, there's a lot of new terminology. The problems are the same, it's just coming in different wrappers, right? And obviously having even locally here with our own central bank, how does the TTIFC play a role in terms of where we see ourselves as that sort of public-private entity that can understand these challenges, understand these entities, and work with our joint regulatory bodies in terms of capacity building and helping them understand and assess these business models and these entities and the technology. So that's definitely where we see ourselves sort of playing a role, because, when we talk about even RegTech and SupTech, which is a new sort of category of fintech where you see not necessarily playing a role on the external side, but basically being fintech for the regulatory environment, right? I think that is something, that I think is going to be a little more pervasive in the region when you speak to the banks and so forth, encouraging that sort of adoption. So, that is where we want to aim to play our role in terms of that capacity building.
Spaces, not just fintech, but things like LEO satellites and so on, because they don't fit neatly into existing regulatory frameworks. And even to simply get a response sometimes in writing from regulators is frustrating. And therefore, we are talking about building digital economies, but at the same time frustrating companies that are ready, willing, and able to invest and provide solutions in the market. So Felicity, I don't know if you want to share your experience in moving, and this is a well-established technology in Africa, and Africa has been one of the leading countries, continents in the world in terms of fintech. So to really bring that technology here to the Caribbean, it is unfortunate some of the frustrations that you and other companies have been facing. So would you like to speak to that, please? Felicity, did you hear the question? Can you hear us? And if not, maybe one of the other panelists can speak, even though maybe not about Z-Money's experience, but perhaps about other companies that have been trying to establish in the region. Mr. Ward, would you like to speak to that? I think Z-Money is actually operating here in Barbados, but not necessarily about the company itself, but about sort of the regulations and why are some of these companies meeting brick walls, basically.
Yeah. Felicity is speaking.
Can you hear us, Felicity?
Felicity, can you hear us?
I think she keeps
Evidently not.
freezing, I think.
Now, hello?
Yes, we're.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
Would you like to go right ahead with your response?
I did not hear most of the question. If you can just repeat it for my benefit.
No, I just basically wanted, in summary, to tell us about your experience in establishing your company here in Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean markets.
Okay, thank you, and apologies to everyone. I had some challenges joining virtually. It's been an experience, I would say, for us. Different from other markets. The Caribbean has been, the experience in the Caribbean has been quite different from other markets our business has expanded into. Of course, there's a regular regulation often have to have. I think that has to be the same across the globe, so across the markets that we've gone into, have been the constant engagement with the regulator to get them to understand our business goal and our operation as a fit. I'm sorry, I'm turning off my video so that my audio can sound better. Please pardon me. So I find that it takes a lot of engagement and deep diving with the regulator to be able to explain clearly and to the very tiny, minute detail, exactly as a fintech, what platforms you're going to be running, how exactly you're going to operate, in order for the regulator to have appreciation for our kind of business. In Barbados, considering that there's been no business like ours, it's taken a lot of time to go through these engagements and reach a place where we're licensed to come into the market and set up. The next level on that is to be able to start engaging customers to understand what kind of a service that a fintech is going to provide. Because what the everyday person is used to is a bank. What you're going to do, the questions that keep coming up, both with customers, even banks and other B2Bs, it's what exactly is your business? What are you operating? Are you a bank? Are you not a bank? Now, that is the one question that fintechs who engage in payments could answer. That is the prime question that you face in the markets, especially in markets that are quite new to the industry. So the question has always been, are you a bank? And then the other thing also is that you find that existing regulation and existing practices, because they've been built and developed around banks, you have to work twice as hard to manage, you have to work twice as hard to be able to start to get the regulator to appreciate your business, and so that even your reporting, the formats in which you do handle your reporting, can be very specific to your business. Otherwise, in the beginning, it's all tailored to the traditional banking model. That has been our experience so far. I'm not sure if anyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, we can hear you. We've just been given a 4 or 5 minute notice just to start wrapping up. It's great to have you with us, Felicity, and I hope you can hear us talking from this end as well. Warwick, perhaps if I can come to you. Do you want to just try and I think the gist of that was it's pretty hard to engage with regulators. I mean, I'd certainly from the UK side have heard the similar sorts of things, but although I would couch it sometimes as to what's the expectation too, organizations like ours sort of get caught a little bit in between these two worlds. So, but I mean, from your point of view, how would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a number of challenges. One, obviously, if it is a new product that's being entered into the market, we would want to engage with any new supplier of these services to make sure that we properly understand the risk, and we properly properly want to understand whether you have the mitigating things in place to make sure that this risk doesn't spill over into the market. A lot of the times as well, to what you will find, and I mentioned it before, is that there isn't capacity, especially if you're talking things like triple entry for like the blockchain, these types of new technologies coming into fore. There isn't the capacity within the framework of the regulatory space to properly deal with this type of new institution right off the bat. And so it would require a longer space in terms of the engagement as opposed to if it was, say, a bricks and mortar bank. The other challenge is that we have to fit these entities within current legislation. So we can't give licenses or we can't give approvals to things outside of the space of the legislation. So then you have to think of what type of solution will be legislative solutions that will be, required for this type of entity, whether this is something that can fit into that bucket. And often we are not able to do it. And so you might have a longer lead time for this type of activity before we find a solution.
Yeah, I think it comes back to a point we were discussing earlier around the need for dialogue, doesn't it? I think when there's a need for governments to change regulation and laws, then obviously there's an enormous delay when actually businesses are just trying to get off the ground and trying to bring opportunities into the market. From my perspective, and I come with a business perspective here, is that element of dialogue. But to the capacity issue, this is one of the areas I think where the Commonwealth and other regional and grouping entities can actually really help. I hear capacity raised all the time. Everywhere I go in the world, there's a capacity gap of some shape or form. It's not in any particular area of the world. I think, especially around the area of technology and finance, there's just a lack of capacity and skills right across the board. And that's where I think, the more scope for collaboration through networks like the Commonwealth. I actually think the Commonwealth has got an enormous USP here because of our shared legal kind of frameworks. There is a commonality there, which other global networks just don't have. You've got to go country by country. I'll talk about that tomorrow. Whereas the Commonwealth, you can work in one group and you've got a shared basis of understanding, knowledge, and legal framework to accelerate solutions where others can't. So I think I'm not going to get in the way of your lunch. I'm more conscious that lunch is next. We've had some technological difficulties on this panel. We've got Felicity there for a couple of minutes, but not long enough, unfortunately, because I think she would have brought an interesting B2C perspective to this conversation. But I hope you found this an insightful conversation. Thank you to my two great speakers. I mean, you couldn't get two better speakers than John and Warwick. I'm very honored to sit here with both of them. And it's a great honor to sit here with all of you and all of those online as well. And I hope this has been a useful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On that note, I would like to thank you, Chris. That was an exceptional panel, very informative as well for our panelists. And I can hand over to Francola, who's going to do a little bit of housekeeping and direct you to where the good food is located and when we will resume. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you again for a wonderful session this morning. So lunch today will be in the Cocoa Patch restaurant where you all had breakfast this morning. So they are ready for you all across there. We have 1 hour for lunch, and we would like to get back into the room at 1:30.